way.
Mr Chair, it does seem a little odd that all the speakers in this committee stage actually so far have come from the opposition, and that this is a bill that essentially just extends a provision that the Labor government brought into effect back in 2005. That seems odd, Mr Chair, because the National Party campaigned so heavily on being tough on crime, being the law and order party, and being the party that would put victims at the centre of justice and law and order policy. Well, and of course the campaign was all about what a bad job Labor had done. Well, if National were really serious, if National actually really had some ideas, and if National were going to follow through on their campaign promises, then they wouldn't be extending something that the Labor Party had already brought in back in 2005. The party, of course, that has had some success in pushing through harsh and draconian law and order legislation is, of course, the ACT Party, who are also stunningly silent this evening. David Garrett was the architect of the 3 strikes legislation, and I was lucky enough to have an interesting debate with Mr Garrett not so long ago. He came up to Palmerston North to extol the virtues of that piece of legislation, and we talked about all the ways in which that also it failed to put victims' rights at the centre, because we're going to see victims going through much longer trials as the incentives come into place to encourage those who have been charged with a crime to fight it to the bitter end, to appeal and to appeal their sentencing, because the sentencing is going to be so harsh. So we're going to see victims dragged through all of that. It did nothing to support victims in the way that this piece of legislation, or at least the forerunners of this piece of legislation, went a small way towards doing. And we talked about the fact that it had absolutely no preventative characters about it whatsoever. And in fact, Mr Garrett even accepted that the Justice Ministry figures were right, and that we were going to see more people going into prison, because it simply wouldn't be effective in actually preventing any crimes, preventing any more people in becoming victims. It was ambulance at the bottom of the cliff stuff, which in a way I suppose this is as well, and that's why it was always only a temporary measure. Labor only brought it in as a temporary measure, and National is so devoid of ideas, so shallow in its campaigning that it actually has nothing to follow it up with. And of course the ACT Party, the supposedly tough on crime, even tougher on crime than National Party, they're trying to outdo each other as to who's tougher, have got absolutely nothing to say about this whatsoever. And perhaps it's actually worth, given that this is an extension of what Labor did when they were in government, it's worth actually reflecting on what a good job Labor actually did do in putting victims' rights at the centre. I mean, back in 2002, as long ago as that, the Sentencing Act was adjusted to introduce a presumption in favour of reparation, and it resulted in reparation being used as a sentence far more frequently. 2002 also saw the increase in the use of restorative justice, so that offenders would actually be more accountable to victims. That really was a piece of legislation that put victims at the centre of sentencing and law and order policy. Labor introduced the Victims' Rights Act back in 2002 as well, and then going forward to 2008, Annette King introduced the Victims' Rights Charter to develop and build an awareness about standard service that victims could actually expect. And of course, Labor promised to put a significant amount of money, about $1.5 million, actually more than that, I think, Mr Chair, into victim support to boost that organisation's ability to provide services to victims. That, Mr Chair, is the kind of policy, the kind of legislation that puts victims' rights at the centre. This is a perfectly reasonable piece of legislation. That's why Labor's going to support it. But it was only ever something temporary. It was a temporary measure with a view to doing more. And the National Party, frankly, midway through its term, has had plenty of time to think up new initiatives to show that it actually had more to its campaigning, more to its rhetoric than just a shallow, knee-jerk reach out to those who felt affected and abused by crimes if they had been victims of it. Mr Chair, this is a nothing bill. We will support it, but it really does nothing for victims.